Hi, I'm Eric J. Barkman, and welcome to episode 4 of Time Out, my vlog about time travel. See, I told you there would be less of a wait between the last episode and this one than previous episodes. And this is a follow-up to the first episode, which dealt with the Arrowverse, specifically the first season of The Flash. This one continues by tackling season 2 of The Flash, season 1 of Legends of Tomorrow, and even season 4 of Arrow, which had a little bit of time travel. As per usual, spoilers will be in this video, so if you haven't seen those shows, you might not want to watch this. There isn't really any Arrow spoilers, so if you've seen the other two but you haven't seen that, you should be fine. But yeah, there are definitely spoilers for Legends of Tomorrow and Flash. And even if you don't mind spoilers, if you haven't actually seen the shows, I'm not sure how much sense this will make. So anyway, the first example of time travel is an Arrow, albeit part of the two-part crossover with The Flash. So in Legends of Yesterday, the second part of the two-part crossover, we have an example of Barry running back in time when outrunning an explosion that'll destroy the city. And, you know, upon running back in time a day, him and Oliver agree to change the timeline so that, you know, the city doesn't get destroyed. This is an example of time travel fairly similar to what happened back in the first season of The Flash, the first time Barry time traveled, and doesn't really tell us anything new. So then we move on to The Flash, where at the very end of the episode, Potential Energy, Reverse Flash appears in the present day, asking Gideon where and when he's shown up. This actually discredits some of my theories from my first episode, but since this is just an end of the episode teaser, I'll wait until later to mention how so. But before we get to that, Legends of Tomorrow started, in which Rip Hunter's wife and son are killed by Vandal Savage, who in 2166 is taking over the world. Rip Hunter travels back in time to 2016, puts together a team of heroes and some villains so that they can travel through time and stop Vandal Savage. Their first stop, 1975, to gather intel. They visit Professor Aldous Boardman 24 hours before his death in order to avoid contaminating the timeline too much. But they are chased after by Kronos, who first appeared in 2016, killing two witnesses after determining they were not integral to the timeline. And then he chased them back to 1975 and went after them. And chain of events happened in which Professor Boardman was killed by Kronos when they tried bringing the professor with them onto the ship. The time ship hides in the temporal zone, where Rip reveals that this mission wasn't sanctioned and he chose the members of the team because of their minimal impact on history. Okay, so there are a few revelations here. First of all, we've learned that the Speed Force isn't the only method of time travel, as there are time ships as well. We also have learned that the timeline is guarded by a group called the Time Masters, who, among other things, have a way of determining a person's importance to the timeline. We also learn of the Temporal Zone, a place where ships can hide, but which is, I think, still connected to the time it's in, because there isn't actual time travel involved when they go to it. And as revealed by Professor Boardman's death, and Rip explains, we learn that time travel trope I really do not like is in play here. That time wants to happen. I do not like this because it personifies time. Unless time actually is a personification. Like, if there's actually, a god of time or something, then I don't mind it as much. But here I'm a bit iffy on it. On the other hand, the Speed Force was kind of personified in Flash, so, you know, whatever. I can live with it. Speaking of the Flash, we return there for the Reverse Flash Returns. Now, this is a younger version of Reverse Flash than we saw in the first season, as he's from an earlier point in his timeline. His timeline, which was erased. Earth 2 Wells theorizes that he is a time remnant, and that even though he doesn't exist in the future, he still has to exist in the present in order to keep the timeline, in order to keep this timeline on the track that it was set on by his appearances in the present. And as a result, the Speed Force protects him. And Wells also says that killing this version of him won't save Barry's mother because that's a fixed point in time. Wait, time out. Wait, what? Okay, so how does this work? Best I can figure, a fixed moment of time just means that the past version of the Reverse Flash will still exist even when the future version no longer does, because of this whole time remnant business in order to keep the timeline on track. Which basically means that anytime a speedster travels back in time, that time that they travel back in time to, they should still be there even if they're not in the future. Then why did the Reverse Flash cease to exist when Eddie was killed? Weird, wibbly, wobbly, timey-wimey stuff because of the singularity, I guess? I don't know. I don't know. It's not a perfect answer, but we work with what we have. Anyway, as the episode goes on, they capture and lock up the Reverse Flash, which causes Cisco to enter a prolonged state of chronic seizing because of the changes in the timeline. Wait, we literally just determined that speedsters in the past are time remnants, so changing what happens to them doesn't change their time remnant versions, right? But Cisco does have his powers that cause weird stuff to happen, so even though the past wouldn't have been changed as a result of this, the future still would be, and that was wreaking havoc with Cisco's powers for reasons I don't know. But anyway, by the end they release the Reverse Flash and Cisco's alright and we can move on. Next up, in the second part of the Legends of Tomorrow pilot, Rip explains that you can't go back and change events you participated in because that would cause time to fold in on itself and create a temporal vortex. But wait, time out. The night of Barry's mother's death, we now have Kid Barry, Future Barry, and Season 1 Barry all there, 3 of them. But honestly, this is easy enough to explain. This isn't an inherent part of time travel, but rather it has to do with the way the time ships work. You can't have 2 of the same time ship in the same time at the same time. Anyways, continuing on this episode, a piece of the Atom suit is captured by Vandal Savage, still in 1975, and Gideon shows a forecast of 2016 in which Central City is in ruins. It's explained that time is like a cement and it takes a while to harden. So they have until Savage's scientists figure out how to make this piece of atom tech work before the timeline is actually set. Wait, time out. What does that even mean? Well, actually, I have a fairly simple solution for this one. This I can handle no problem. See, from the point where time changes, you have all these lines moving out, and so as it gets further away, there's more and more changes that happen as a result of it, right? So within this window, up until where they figure out the suit, it's relatively minor changes, and they can fix it. Once it gets to that point, the changes are much more massive, and more than Gideon can accurately predict a way to, fix the timeline. And because, as we just determined, that time ship can't be in the same time twice, they can't just go back and try again. So they have to, they have a limited time in which to do it. As the episode goes on, Martin Stein, Sarah, and Jax meet a younger version of Stein and accidentally alter the timeline, which causes Stein's wedding ring to disappear off his finger when he returns to the ship. But he still has all his memories of his wife. Wait, time out. Wait, what? Why are memories being treated differently than physical objects? I mean, I know the real world reason, because writers often have this glorified view of the human mind that it's somehow separate from physical reality. But honestly, I can explain it easy enough. See, on a time ship, people are protected from changes of the timeline. That's, just part of the technology that you would need in order for this kind of work to, function. But then why did the ring disappear? Well, the protection field that the time ship has is probably somewhat fluid. It'll prevent, people from forgetting stuff or being erased from the timeline or whatever. But, it'll allow little things like, a ring disappearing through as a sort of warning that, oh no, something's happening that we need to fix. Anyway, the next couple episodes are Blood Ties and White Knights, both of which, while they involve time travel, as that's the premise of the show, don't really offer anything new to discuss. And then we return to Flash for the episode Escape from Earth 2, in which Zoom kills Jay. Why is this relevant? Because we later learn that Zoom is Jay, but we'll get more into that later. And for now, we return to Legends of Tomorrow, where we'll again have another episode, failsafe, with no major revelations. But then we get to Star City 2046, which has some interesting things to consider. Despite the earlier claim that they aren't super important to the timeline, we do learn that because of Sarah and Ray not being around, that may have had an influence on a pretty major influence on what Star City is like in 2046. But this could be undone by them returning home. Which tells us that, since they lived to January 2016, until they actually return to their own time, it's as if they no longer existed from that point moving forward. Even if, they will eventually return, until they actually do, it's just not part of the timeline. But then nothing really major to note in the next two episodes, Maroon and Night of the Hawk. And now we go back to Flash for the episode Flashback, in which Barry travels back to Season 1 in order to get some assistance from Eobard Thawne back when he was posing as Wells. Well, interesting thing this episode does is introduces time wraiths, which are like these creatures that exist in the time stream and go after speedsters traveling through time. Barry has so far been lucky in that, he hasn't encountered them during time travel. And Eobard mentions that, when he travels through time, he knows how to avoid them. Now, I'm a bit iffy on creatures naturally evolving within the time stream like this. So I'd actually like to think that they were created possibly by the Time Masters or possibly some other time travel group as a method of trying to keep speedsters from interfering with the timeline. And speaking of it, in order to defeat this time wraith that's going after Barry, they do end up getting some help from Pied Piper, and as a result, when Barry returns to the present day, he is an ally instead of an enemy. Which, it's a bit of a change to the timeline, but nothing else major seems to have been changed. Then we go back to Legends of Tomorrow for the episode Left Behind, which introduces the concept of time drift. Basically, when you stay in a time for a while, you start losing connections to your previous life. I'd say this isn't so much temporal phenomenon as it's more of a psychological phenomenon that's just, impacted by time travel. It's similar to if you live move somewhere and live there for a while, you start losing ties to your old place, just with a temporal component. So I'm mostly just mentioning it because I think it's kind of cool. And the next episode, Progeny, has nothing really to mention. But then we get to the main episode 8, in which we learn about time fragmentation, and that there are temporal blind spots, areas that the Time Masters can't see. That's going to become relevant later. Also, Stein, young boy, who's sick and dying, and cures him using medicine that was technically available at that time, but wasn't known to be useful as medicine at the time. And he later learns that that young boy was H.G. Wells. Wait, time out. That is stupid. Because Stein is only there because of the fact that they're traveling through time. But he already comes from a timeline in which H.G. Wells is a known historical figure. Which means that the original timeline, H.G. Wells still must have survived somehow, which makes what Stein did effectively pointless. And we have another Flash episode with time travel up next, versus Zoom, which reveals that when Zoom killed Jay, it was a time remnant. Basically, he went back in time just a little bit, so there are two of him, and then one of him killed the other, which is really quite a brilliant strategy when you think about it. And we now return to the Legends episode Last Refuge, in which the Pilgrim, an agent of the Time Masters, tries to kill the Legends at earlier points in their timeline. Now you may say, wait, didn't we already figure that they would be protected from change of the timeline as long as they're aboard the Wave Rider? Major changes anyway, like, disappearing rings, sure, but they shouldn't be killed, right? Yes, that is the case. And that seems to also be hinted at in this episode, because they do kidnap themselves, which means they themselves wouldn't, are no longer, their younger selves that they kidnap are no longer part of the timeline from that point on, but they're still on the ship, active as themselves, with all of their memories. But here's the thing. When past Ray gets attacked, present Ray aboard the Wave Rider starts getting injured. Now here's the thing. The protection is something that's aboard the Wave Rider. That's something about, like, the way the ship is designed and, like, to protect them. But it was built by the Time Masters. Meanwhile, the Pilgrim works for the Time Masters. So it's possible they have weapons that can get around whatever kind of protection the Wave Rider would give. And we do see that she does have weapons that do weird things with time. She's able to, like, pause or reverse attacks that are sent after her. Next episode is Leviathan with nothing new. Then is River of Time, which introduces the concept of temporal radiation, which causes Jax to rapid age when he's exposed to it, but sending it through the time stream is able to cure him. Weird, but okay, whatever. And then we have Destiny, which introduces the Oculus. Not to be confused with the Oculus Rift. Anyway, the Oculus allows the Time Masters, at least the few that are aware of it, not just predict the future, but actually look into any time, past, present, and future, and allows for direct manipulation. Okay, wait, time out. I'll give them the viewing of anywhere in the timeline, except presumably the blind spots that were mentioned earlier. But I'm pretty sure the direct manipulation is an exaggeration. I'm pretty sure it's just that because they're able to look at any time, they can know, okay, we changed this, this will change this. It's not like, oh, I'm pressing a button and manipulating the timeline. Like, what? Especially to say that the Oculus can't be used on the vanishing point, and yet we see Rip seeing an event that happens in the vanishing point, which is then changed. So yeah, I'm just going to say it makes manipulating the timeline easier because you're seeing exactly into the timeline instead of just making predictions. Also in the episode, they do end up destroying it, which will at least render the whole point moot for future stuff. And Vandal Savage gets a time ship, so yay! Anyway, the final episode of the season is Legend. Wait for it. Dairy. It's just legendary. Sorry for the How I Met Your Mother joke. Anyway, in 1944, Hawkgirl, who had been captured by Savage, manages to get away from him, meets up with a soldier whose helmet she recognizes, so she puts a note in the helmet. And then, back on the Wave Rider, some chronometric repositioning happens, causing the helmet to be on a different desk than it originally was, and it gets knocked off accidentally by Jax. And they realize, wait, wasn't it over there, not there? Rip realizes what's happening, looks in it, finds the note. Chronometric repositioning will be, I would say, similar to, the whole thing with the ring disappearing. It's, a minor change that the ship allows in order to show, oh, something's happening to the timeline. So anyway, Savage's plan is to detonate Thanagarian meteors in 3 different times, simultaneously, using a ritual, which will destroy the Earth in all 3 times, causing a paradox, which would result in a time quake that would return the Earth to the point of the first chronothermic reaction, ancient Egypt. This can only be done when Earth and Thanagar are in alignment, which happens and amongst probably other years as well, but the years in question that they choose are 1958, 1975, and 2021. So Savage goes back to the first two times, 58 and 75, and tells his past selves that are in those times what to do. Meanwhile, in 2021, he'll be going and doing it himself instead of telling his past self from that time. Because remember, this Savage is from 2166. So wait, time out. A few things here. How do you do something simultaneously in different times? That's where the ritual comes in, I think, as it links the three times together. So when he starts, so the starting point of the ritual in each of the times links the times together from that point on until it's complete. Second problem is that in 1975, White Canary and Firestorm see the team from the previous episode, from the pilot in 1975 doing their thing, which means that they're interfering in events that they directly participated in previously. Now you may say that throws out my theory that the Wave Rider can't exist simultaneously in two times at the same time. But does it? What if they didn't actually use the Wave Rider itself, but rather use one of the jump ships to go back to this time? This actually strengthens my theory then. So anyway, the team kills him in the three in times. Only the 2166 version of Savage is actually killed by Hawkman and Hawkgirl. So he's the only one that actually stayed dead. The other ones would recover, thus keeping the timeline up to that point intact. Unfortunately, including the deaths of Rip's wife and son, as that was done by this version of Savage before he left. And before we end off, we still have to go back to The Flash for its season finale, The Race of His Life. In the episode, at different points, both Zoom and Flash create time remnants to, help out with stuff, which we've already gone over. But then at the end of the episode, Barry goes back in time and saves his mother, which means that on that night, there's now 4 Barrys. Kid Barry, Future Flash, Season 1 Flash, and now Season 2 Flash. The only problem is that after Season 2 Barry, current present Barry, saves his mother, Season 1 Barry fades out of existence. Wait, time out. He's a timeline remnant, right? So he should still be there, right? That's what we've established, I thought. On one hand, it does line up with Reverse Flash disappearing, but we were trying to track that up to the singularity because it doesn't really make sense. And we can actually still do that. When Barry travels back in time and he has, his time mirage running beside himself, and I've said in the previous episode that, they kind of must merge together. Clearly what happened is that the Season 1 timeline remnant Barry, because, now that he's changed his timeline, that returns to the present, that time will be gone. So the 2 Barrys merged. And, this is a completely subconscious thing, not, at all, oh, let's merge. It's just, it happens subconsciously. And that's what happened. That's what we have to go with. Anyway, to wrap up this incredibly long episode, we now have 2 methods of time travel, Speed Force and time ships. The timeline is changeable, but there can still be remnants of the previous timelines through the Speed Force, as well as being protected by being aboard time ships. Also, time wants to happen. So while it can be possible to make small changes, the bigger the change, the harder it is. I'll probably do a follow-up on the Arrowverse sometime after the end of Season 3 of Flash, 2 of Legends of Tomorrow, 5 of Arrow, and Season 2 of Supergirl, in order to cover any new stuff in any of those shows. We didn't have any time travel in Supergirl so far. And it also is a different universe, so the rules might be slightly different for it, but it does connect to the others. And we'll see how any of my theories get thrown out of whack by the new stuff in these seasons. As for now, the next episode will be about How I Met Your Mother. The TV series, I mean. I may or may not have actually met your mother. I don't know. It depends on who you are, a viewer. And yes, the TV series How I Met Your Mother did indeed have time travel. So anyway, that's it for tonight, and have fun.